This is Under the Lens, featuring economic research by Gordon T. Long, editor and publisher of GordonTLong.com. The content of this presentation is strictly the opinion of Gordon T. Long and is based on facts he feels to be accurate as a result of his research at this time. All listeners are advised to independently verify all research for market changes. The following opinions are not in any way a solicitation for business, nor should they be considered investment advice. You should always consult a registered investment advisor before making investment decisions. Now, let's join Gordon for today's show.
Good morning. It is Thursday, August the 21st, 2014. I'm Gord Long at GordonTLong.com. As is normally the case, I have a lot of charts for us to go through this morning, so therefore I will pass over some of them quickly, but leave you to examine them further at your leisure. You'll need to open your viewer to full screen viewing, or you'll not be able to see some of the detail I'll be discussing. A reminder before we begin, do not trade from any of these slides. They are for educational and discussion purposes only. The purpose of the audio is to discuss key developments in those areas not specifically updated in this month's Global Macro Tipping Points Research Report document. The research document this month updates the regional developments. Therefore, the slides this morning will focus on our other three report areas of the GMT report, the global risk, then macro, and then U.S. economic developments. As I often do, I'd like to tie them together into a discussion. I want to focus on the 12 ways quantitative easing is quickly destroying capitalism as we know it. The 12 ways are shown here, which I'd like to go through and then tie together with how this will likely end and what the high probability outcome could be. Nothing seems to stir emotions more quickly than the word capitalism. It seems it means a lot of things to different people depending on their overall belief system. What we need to focus on is that the core tenet of capitalism is that savings in the form of profits is reinvested into productive assets. That is what capitalism is. There is nothing wrong with that. And as a matter of fact, everything right about it as far as I'm concerned. Unfortunately, this is not what is happening today. Profits are not being reinvested into productive assets. They are being used in all manner of financial engineering. When Dell Inc. spends more on buybacks than they earned over their entire lifetime, then it is hard to see how earnings are being used to invest in productive assets that will create jobs and strengthen the economy. As I've shown in other presentations and papers, the S&P 500 corporations will spend nearly $1 trillion on buybacks between 2013 and 2014. This is a distortion of unprecedented magnitude as a direct result of interest rates being so low that borrowing tax-deductible money to reduce share count is less expensive than paying dividends. Dividends which were the bedrock of funds that used to be used for widows and orphans. What we forget is that consumption directly subtracts from savings. It seems an arcane point today with the word savings becoming almost obsolete. When you have a 70% consumption economy, it leaves less and less savings available for investment. As government at all levels becomes larger, they additionally consume savings. This is occurring because the expansion of credit through quantitative easing is replacing savings. As Richard Duncan writes in The New Depression, creditism now and has replaced capitalism. When the central banks increase their balance sheet by $10 trillion, this money and credit explodes onto the scene in a manner where half-baked ideas, which can only be considered malinvestment, often place destabilizing pressures on proven business models. It is the old adage, bad money forces out good money. The former CEO of Citigroup, prior to the financial crisis, it is often cited as justifying the excessive risk being taken by his organization, which subsequently needed to be bailed out, as you recall, by taxpayers, as, and I quote, "We have to dance until the music stops." He felt he had no choice. If Citigroup didn't make bad mortgage loans, someone else would, and Citi would lose to competitors, the stock would suffer, and management would be summarily replaced. This is what happens when you have negative real rates for as historically long a period as quantitative easing has dictated. As Nobel economist Milton Friedman so famously stated, inflation is always and everywhere a monetary phenomenon, in the sense that it is and can be produced only by more rapid increase in the quantity of money than in output. Printing money or expanding credit creates inflation. We have inflation in basic needs, like all our basic needs, like food, education, health care, contrary to the government's CPI measure. But even using their understated number, we still have negative real disposable income. This is dramatically pressuring aggregate demand. Top-line growth by corporations is flat in nominal terms and falling in real terms, however you want to measure inflation. Inflationary pressures without job and wage growth is effectively killing the golden goose of capitalism. This is what sustained quantitative is doing and has wrought on us. For a number of years now, we have followed the evolution of this GordonTLong.com graphic and how monetary policy via quantitative easing 1, 2, and 3 and Operation Twist has fostered a lack of price discovery and the mispricing of risk. When the control policies of financial repression are employed, the elements of moral hazard and unintended consequences lead to a dysfunctional market. Because of misinformation, distortions, and deceptions, the markets are unable to correctly price risk. As such, they inevitably become dysfunctional in delivering the mechanics and feedback loops required for a capitalist system to function properly. Distortions and delusions like the Bernanke put remove effective price discovery from the capital markets. There are endless examples of waste and corruption that comes with easy, cheap, and excessive credit. The one that is on my desk today is articulated quite well by Doug French at the Canadian von Mises organization, and I quote, "The world's central bankers have given companies the urge to merge. Mergers and acquisitions activity has already reached $2.2 trillion this year, according to Thomson Reuters Deals Intelligence, up 70% from this time a year ago. The deals are big, with 8 acquisitions, each over $5 billion, being announced in just a single week in July. However, CEO buying sprees do not create new jobs and new products that make our lives better, but instead just are wasteful malinvestments that destroy capital." End of quote. Easy, cheap, and excessive credit begets financial engineering, which discourages risk-taking. Capitalism is about rewarding risk-taking. Today, through financial accounting games such as off-balance sheet entities, contingent liability accounting, double Dutch-Irish sandwich tax structures, inversions, etc., we now avoid risk at all cost for games of trickery. Manufacturing corporations with product life cycles so short and more than 90% of next year's unproven products still on the design boards, risk is larger than ever before. Few want to play that game any longer, when accounting and regulatory arbitrage offer less risky and more immediate returns. Never forget that the Federal Reserve's primary raison d'etre is to finance the government. Easy, cheap, and excessive credit is at its core about the size of the government's deficit and its ability to pay for its expenditures. With the advent of fiat currencies and unsound money, governments have increased in size and, as a consequence, have increasingly become the focus of companies and their innovation. This is tremendous innovation. There is tremendous innovation going on in the security and surveillance industry, for example. All of this serves the government, but which is an unproductive investment of savings from a capitalist perspective. Governments don't produce wealth. They simply shift it from those that do to those that they choose. Quantitative easing has been allowing this in a massive way. When capitalism is working properly and risk-taking is rewarded, the consumer gets more for less. They get more value for their hard-earned wages and savings. When it isn't, and risk-taking and investment are reduced, the consumer inevitably gets less for more. The squeeze comes on the offering and the product. It takes many forms, but the most blatant on my desk again this morning is the soda industry, their shift to smaller cans. We are told by spin doctors that this is to help us reduce our calorie intake. How many believe that? Of course you don't, because you've become accustomed since quantitative easing began that you're getting less and less with every debased dollar you spend. If you live outside of the developed economies, it is very clear to you that quantitative easing is nothing more than a debasement strategy similar to trade wars during the last deflationary era of the 1920s and 30s. They call it currency wars, but it is about attempting to debase your currency by printing more of it into circulation. The cheaper your currencies, the more competitive your export products become, even if the productivity is not sound within them. If you were the strategist in charge of a currency war strategy, a sustained quantitative easing policy would be exactly what the doctor would order. Thank you, Dr. Bernanke and Dr. Yellen. When faced with increased regulatory interference, firms respond by experimenting, making riskier mergers and acquisitions, and consequently more mistakes, according to Peter Klein in his book, The Capitalist and the Entrepreneur. In the book, The Synergy Trap, Mark Sorer says valuation models turn on three things: free cash flow forecast, residual value, and a discount rate. All three are heavily influenced by Fed policy and obviously the low interest policy of ZIRP and quantitative easing. The cost of capital is integral to making these assumptions. The lower the assumed interest rate or cost of capital, the higher the price for the acquisition that the models will justify, correctly or incorrectly. Once interest rates go up, these valuations models could be blown to pieces and are. Regulations go hand in hand with the Fed policy initiatives such as quantitative easing, and as a consequence, the behavioral shifts by corporate executives in the functioning of the capitalist system of capital allocation. It comes as no surprise that the balance sheet of the central banks and the Federal Reserve, and Japan in particular, have become, what I'll say, compromised. A major new crisis shock and any required buffer has been spent, and corporate executives know that. For a well-functioning capitalist system to perform, it needs the certainty of government policy, financial stability, and the rule of law. Quantitative easing is bringing all of these more and more into question by the private sector. Again, uncertainty limits investment, and that, after all, is what the capitalist system is about: investment. We have a ticking time bomb when it comes to municipal government funding, pensions, and entitlements. We have an imploding municipal problem like Detroit, Flint, Puerto Rico, and many more. A $5 trillion underfunded pension problem, which is already in existence with even these low yields. And an $84 trillion underfunded U.S. Social Security and Medicare entitlement program. Debt is going to explode higher, and the Federal Reserve will be forced to continue expanding its balance sheet further and further. This can only go on for so long. Citigroup's analyst Rob Buckland has published this diagram of where he thinks we are in the economic cycle, and it's slightly terrifying. Basically, we're in phase 3 of a 4-phase credit equity cycle. In Buckland's theory, originally developed by Citi's Matt King, this is the phase in which irrational bubbles form right before everything comes crashing down. In Buckland's telling, the economy goes through the 4 cycles. Phase 1, this begins at the end of a recession when interest rates have fallen, money is cheap, but stocks are still battered. A bull market sets in during phase 2 when stocks start to rise as easy credit lubricates the economy. This is the tricky part. Stocks are still flying high, but credit spreads are widening as investors become increasingly unwilling to further risk. Corporate CEOs have now experienced a lengthy period of gains and become risk-happy. And we'd note that central banks are already talking about tightening credit by raising interest rates. Bubbles can form in phase 3, Buckland says, as the high-flying stock market ignores the early warning signs of the deteriorating credit markets. Hello, have I been talking about this? And take the tech startups IPOs as another example. In phase 4, stocks react to the lack of available credit by collapsing. and we see the kinds of things you get in a recession. This is a classic bear market when equity and credit prices fall together. It is usually associated with collapsing profits and worsening balance sheets. We're in phase 3 right now, Buckland says, but we may not be very far into it. Here's Buckland's checklist of warning signs for phase 3. Highlighted are some things that should really scare you. What we eventually will see, in my estimation, is effectively the biggest debt for equity swap in history. The banks and corporations are going to end up with the assets. The public and government is going to end up with the liabilities. And Mr. Global is going to end up with the net worth and the equity that goes with all of this. I laid this out in last month's monthly market commentary, and I'll leave you to review it there. I'd like to thank you for listening, and I hope that 2014 turns out to be an outstanding investment year for you, and all the best until we talk again next month. Thank you for listening.
This has been Gordon T. Long, editor and publisher of GordonTLong.com. New recordings are posted regularly and can be found at GordonTLong.com. New show notifications are available through RSS feed, iTunes, and other social networking venues at GordonTLong.com.